Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today I'm looking at some Dynasty buys. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's go. First player, Brian Thomas. Now, some might wonder why Brian Thomas is a Dynasty buy. He's been playing so well that he seems tough to acquire, but Thomas is an example of a buy high because I think he's shown that he's elite and still is not valued there. So far in 2024, Thomas has 22 catches, 397 yards, 3 touchdowns on 34 targets, 4.4 catches, and 79.4 yards a game. That's really good. 8th in yards per game among wide receiver, already competing with the best wide receivers in the league. Thomas has 8 or 9 targets in the last 3 games. He only had 4 targets in the first 2 weeks, each of those. So those were his first 2 NFL games. I think what we've seen over the past 3 weeks is more indicative of his role long term. We can clearly see that Thomas, not Gabe Davis, is the top outside wide receiver for the Jaguars. And I think Thomas is clearly ahead of Christian Kirk as well. Now, why do I have Brian Thomas as a dynasty buy? I think he's still underrated because he went under the radar a little bit in this big, solid wide receiver class with 3 elite prospects. The advanced metrics say that he is good, and he was still an excellent prospect, even if he wasn't as good as the big 3, who's playing well immediately as a rookie. Thomas has 2.43 yards per route run, 17th among wide receivers so far. 2.42 yards per team pass attempt, 9th among wide receivers. 11.7 yards per target, 9th among wide receivers. And a 21.8% target share and a 23% target rate, both 36th among wide receivers. Now, remember though, these are his first 5 games. He's already a great wide receiver on the targets he has received and on the routes he has ran. We saw that in the previous numbers. Imagine if he got more opportunity, just like what occurred from weeks 1 through 2 to weeks 3 through 5. It shouldn't be that surprising that Thomas is already playing well given his college profile. In his final college season, I will say he didn't do much in the first 2 college seasons, but in the final college season, 68 catches, 1,177 yards, and 17 touchdowns. He was great, and this got him drafted in the first round because of his strong play at LSU. Maybe Brian Thomas, like I said, went under the radar because, no, he was not as good of a prospect as Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, or Rome Odunze, especially Malik Neighbors on the same team. But, he was still a good prospect. Now, how to buy Brian Thomas? Thomas is highly valued, but he's not valued as the elite young wide receiver that he should be. Here are 3 trades from the Dynasty Daddy trade database where you could buy Brian Thomas at a massive discount. You buy Brian Thomas for James Cook? I almost find this hard to believe. I mean, who is doing this in Dynasty? Maybe people are doing this. I don't know. Maybe people don't watch my YouTube channel. Maybe people don't follow my content, but this is ridiculous. I would much rather have Brian Thomas over James Cook. You buy Brian Thomas for Jaden Reed. I get this one. I get it. I get that Jaden Reed has played really, really well. But if we had to look at which of these 2 players we think could be a top 5 dynasty wide receiver, only one of them can do it, and it's Brian Thomas. It's not Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed has that role. We know what Jaden Reed is. Great player, but he's not going to be what Brian Thomas could be, and honestly, what we're already seeing from Brian Thomas. And then there's this last one, which is also wild to me. I mean, you could buy Brian Thomas for Kyle Pitts, who we don't want Kyle Pitts. Jameson Williams, who's and 25-3rd. I mean, these are not even assets in the same vicinity as Brian Thomas. I would much like to convert these. This is not even 5 quarters for $1. This is 3 quarters for $1. So I would easily do this to get Brian Thomas. Now, my second player, Rashid Shaheed. So Shaheed has been great this season, but Derek Carr is hurt, which opens a buy low window that would not be there otherwise, but it is there. Now, so far, Shaheed has 19 catches, 338 yards, 3 touchdowns, 34 targets, 3.8 catches, and 67.6 yards a game. He has the most targets, most yards, and most receiving touchdowns on the Saints. Although Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave do have more catches. The Saints have committed to getting Rashid Shaheed involved the last 2 weeks with 11 and 9 targets in the last 2 games. He has been involved consistently. Now, of course, the Derek Carr injury, past success, and we have elite advanced stats for Shaheed this year. So if Carr had not gotten hurt, there would be no buying window on Shaheed. I think that is causing a buy window on Shaheed. But because of that, he might be available. I fully believe that Shaheed is a real asset. He's only 26 years old and shown signs of talent in 2022 and 2023. before a full breakout this year. In 2022, as a UDFA, 28 catches, 488 yards, 2 touchdowns on 34 targets, 2.3 catches, and 40.7 yards a game. He was explosive as a rookie, 14.4 yards a target. And this is an incredible stat line for a UDFA. He was very impactful. And then in 2023, even better, 46 catches, 719 yards, 5 touchdowns on 75 targets, 3.1 catches, and 47.9 yards per game. He evolved into the Saints' clear wide receiver 2 last year. And he's only grown that role this year. 2.83 yards per route run. I mean, that's excellent. That's 11th among wide receivers. That is a really, really strong number. 2.49 yards per team pass attempt, 7th among wide receivers. And 0.62 fantasy points per route, 8th among wide receivers. He's a good wide receiver. He's currently outscoring Chris Olave, but it's not just on the big plays because he has more targets than Olave. Now, I'm not saying that Shaheed is better than Olave. He's not a better dynasty asset than Olave. And I'm not saying that. Maybe Olave would be a buy too. But I do think that Shaheed is a real player that can be obtained at a low cost. The first trade, I mean, a 25-second Greg Dortch and Justice Hill. I mean, this is not really anything here. I would much rather Shaheed over that trio. This next one, you could have Shaheed and a 25-second for Travis Etienne. Maybe this is more of a comment on Etienne, but I'd rather have Shaheed over Etienne in Dynasty at this point. I don't want Etienne at all. So I would easily take this offer to acquire Shaheed. 2/3 for Shaheed. I'd take Shaheed over that. Shaheed is a player who I think is not just going to have value this year. I think he's going to have value beyond this year. So I would take Shaheed over the 2/3. And then lastly, Shaheed for Jalen Tolbert. These are two very different players. Both are in year 3, but one of them, Shaheed, actually showed signs of life for 2 years and then broke out. And the other did literally nothing for 2 years and then has a role now. Shaheed of the two is the far better bet to stay relevant. If you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and the ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month and include all of that. If you want to know more about the Patreon, check out both of my why you should join the Patreon videos on the channel. I really appreciate everyone who signed up and any new patrons who join. As I say on every video, all question and answer will take place on the Patreon only. It will not take place on Twitter. It will not take place in the YouTube comments. If you are asking me questions about your team, that will be for paying customers only. You can click on the top link in the top right corner, patreon.com/fantasyadvice to sign up. And for those who say that I promote it too much, you clearly haven't been following my content. I will not apologize for promoting my content, especially since independent content is really, really difficult to keep going. So I am not sorry, but I do really appreciate everyone who signs up, and I would love to see more patrons get in there. We're having a lot of great discussion as the season goes. With that said, let's get into our next player, which is Ladd McConkey. McConkey has quietly had a good rookie year, but it's not being talked about enough. Through 4 games, 15 catches, 176 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24 targets, 3.8 catches, and 44 yards a game. Coming off a week 5 bye, raw numbers don't look that great, but I'm actually pretty impressed with McConkey and the run-heavy Chargers offense. He's had 6 or 7 targets in all, but the Chargers blowout win over the Panthers in week 2, where the Chargers barely threw the ball. And I don't think blowout victories are going to be the most common game script for the Chargers this year. Why do I have McConkey as a dynasty buy? Strong role and excellent advanced stats. So he leads the Chargers in targets, receptions, and yards. Quentin Johnston got more involved over the first couple of games with a few big touchdown receptions, but McConkey is the clear leading wide receiver. McConkey's playing in some 2 wide receiver sets, which is good. As a prospect, some people were concerned about McConkey being limited to being an only slot wide receiver, only playing in the slot. That has not happened. He's been just as involved in 2 wide receiver sets as Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer. He finally topped the 75% snap share in week 4. McConkey has a 27.3% target share, 12th among wide receivers, 30% target rate. So he's being targeted when he's out there, 11th among wide receivers. These stats show that McConkey is earning targets early on. Don't be fooled by the Chargers' run-heavy offense. McConkey is showing signs of being a high target earner. He also has 0.56 fantasy points per route, 15th among wide receivers, and 2.2 yards per route run, 24th among wide receivers. So he's also doing well on the routes he's getting. He is already a good player. It's just the offense keeping the overall stats down. But McConkey himself, by every metric, is already a good wide receiver in his rookie year. Now, McConkey's still undervalued despite being a rookie because the counting stats aren't there. And we know that people are obsessed with counting stats. So you can buy Ladd McConkey and a 25-second for Chris Godwin. If you're not competing, I would just take McConkey in the second. McConkey and Godwin probably are similar in dynasty value. And McConkey's over 5 years younger. Talk about capitalizing on a big game. I mean, I like, Tony Pollard, I guess, but I would much rather have Ladd McConkey than the combination of Tony Pollard and Juju Smith-Schuster, who had his first relevant game, and I don't even know how long on Monday night. And then this last one, buy Ladd McConkey for a 25-second. I would absolutely do that. McConkey was picked in the early second this year, and I think he's gained value, not lost it. So why he would go for a 25-second, I have no idea. So I would much rather have Ladd McConkey here. Now, there's one big piece of unfortunate news to discuss. Nico Collins went to the IR with a hamstring injury, and this sucks. I did mention on the 5 Takeaway show about looking at the tank Dell market, both buying and selling. Now that we know that Collins is out for a long time, I think maybe I'd look more at selling Tank Dell. Maybe now you can get that 25 first for Dell. Also, if you're not contending, I'd happily explore the market on buying Collins because he's elite. We have seen that he's elite. He is the wide receiver one in this offense, not by a little, but by a lot. He's by far the alpha in this offense compared to everyone else. Nobody is going to take that role away. Nobody is going to challenge for that role. That is not going to change. So if, you're not competing, I would explore buying Collins. But unfortunately, this hamstring injury, they put him on IR really quickly. I think it's a minimum of 4 weeks. I'm not sure it's going to be only 4 weeks. It could be 6 weeks, like the Justin Jefferson injury last year. So I am nervous about this for this year. As a competing team, I would not be looking to buy Collins in the idea that I'm going to have him down the stretch. I can't rely on that. So only for rebuilders in terms of acquiring Collins. Now, I have a few Patreon questions. We'll jump into those. From a talent perspective, I think we can all agree that Rome Odunze is great, but has what we've seen out of his production so far scared you at all? How do you foresee him moving forward? No concerns with Odunze. Caleb Williams is picking up his play, like I mentioned on 5 Takeaways. My takeaway there was to buy Rome Odunze. 15 catches, 206 yards, and a touchdown on 29 targets. Not worried at all. This is not bad for a first 5 games for a wide receiver. I have zero concerns. Just because other players, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, are doing better doesn't mean that I'm concerned about Rome Odunze. So the answer is not really, if at all, to any concerns. Since tight ends are less valuable in non-tight end premium superflex leagues, that's true. They're not as valuable in those leagues. How many tight ends are you looking to roster? Never think about things this way. I don't care about a number of tight ends to roster. There's a roster construction nonsense that's from the very loud and very wrong subset of creators. You know who they are, who would have told you if you had 3 other tight ends, just cut Tucker Kraft. You don't need him. He's your 4th tight end. Oh, no. Useless to your team. Well, clearly not so useless. So, no, there's no number of tight ends. This is a ridiculous way of thinking about things. The only thing that's changed for me has nothing to do with the number of tight ends. What it does have to do is that the top range of tight ends and maybe the middle top range, or Mark Andrews, for example, we're all overvalued. So I'm less likely to have any particular one of them if I'm redrafting now, but I don't have a limit on the number of tight ends. I would never say something like that. Is it time to sell high on the high-end premium dynasty running backs, or is it case by case to hold? It's not selling high, but those players are not giving you the production for the risk they carry as running backs and what they cost. I'd be fine selling Bijan, Robinson, Breece Hall, especially Bijan, because I feel like he still carries a lot of value. Notice his KTC value is still really high. In general, I can tell you I wouldn't end up with any of the top running backs if drafting a team today. Not that I ever went that strategy, but even less so now. There's just too many other cheaper running backs out there. So yes, if you can get a good offer for those high-end running backs, I would be absolutely comfortable with selling. Now, if you liked the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon, right up there. Dynasty, starts it, redraft, and more. And every sign-up helps support my independent content. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.